In just 4 days, over 30,000 Soviet soldiers died storming the Seelow Heights, not because victory required it, not because military necessity demanded it, but because Stalin needed Berlin before the Americans arrived. By April 22nd, Lenin's birthday, on April 1st, 1945, Stalin summoned his two most aggressive marshals to Moscow. Georgy Zhukov and Ivan Konev stood before him as he asked a simple question. Who is going to take Berlin? Are we or are the Allies? Konev answered first, "We will take Berlin." Stalin smiled. Then he drew a line on the map and made both men an offer that would cost tens of thousands of lives. Whoever storms into Berlin first, the city will be his. The race was on. Both marshals rushed to the airport, their planes leaving within 2 minutes of each other. That same day, Stalin sent a message to General Eisenhower, claiming that Berlin had lost its former strategic importance and that only secondary Soviet forces would be allocated to the German capital. Historian Antony Beevor calls it the greatest April Fool joke in modern history. While telling the Americans Berlin didn't matter, Stalin was secretly allocating 2.5 million men to capture it. The Seelow Heights wasn't just high ground. It was a deliberately engineered death trap. General Gotthard Heinrici, commanding Army Group Vistula, had transformed the approaches to Berlin into a layered killing zone. 3 fortified defensive lines extended up to 25 kilometers deep. The Oder floodplain stretched before the heights, already saturated by spring thaw. Then Heinrici's engineers released water from an upstream reservoir, transforming the battlefield into an impassable swamp. The heights rose 48 meters above the floodplain, not especially tall, but the inclines were so steep in places that tanks would be forced to search for detours, funneling directly into pre-registered kill zones. The web of canals that could normally be crossed by armor had become small rivers, requiring bridges under fire. Every approach was covered by minefields, anti-tank ditches, and bunkers with interlocking fields of fire. German artillery had pre-registered every likely attack route. Machine gun nests created overlapping fields of fire across the entire floodplain. And Heinrici had prepared something else, something that would make Zhukov's massive bombardment utterly worthless. He was ready to give up his first line of trenches entirely. Zhukov had assembled overwhelming force. The first Belarusian front numbered 908,000 men, over 3,000 armored vehicles, and nearly 17,000 guns. They had stockpiled over 7 million rounds of artillery ammunition. 1.2 million shells weighing 98,000 tons would be fired in the opening barrage alone. Facing them stood General Theodor Busse's 9th Army, approximately 110,000 men with 512 operational tanks and 344 guns. 14 understrength divisions defending what Hitler called the gates of Berlin. 10-1 in men, 6-1 in armor, nearly 50-1 in artillery. The Soviets had packed as many as 270 artillery pieces on each mile of their front, 1 gun every 11 feet. The British bombardment at the Battle of the Somme used 1,537 guns firing 1.5 million shells over 4 days. The Soviet crews at Seelow could have matched that total in 90 minutes. At 3:00 a.m. on April 16th, approximately 9,000 artillery pieces and Katyusha rocket launches opened fire simultaneously. A German soldier named Friedrich Schoeneck described it. A deafening noise fills the air. Compared to everything that has gone before, this is no longer a barrage. It is a hurricane that tears everything up above us, in front of and behind us. The sky is glowing red, as if it was about to burst. The ground wobbles. shakes and rocks like a ship in a force 10 wind. Buildings shook in Berlin 60 miles away. Over 500,000 shells fell on the German positions in the first 30 minutes. But Heinrici had anticipated this. Hours before the bombardment, he had withdrawn his defenders from the first line of trenches. The Soviet shells obliterated empty positions. Then Zhukov deployed his secret weapon, 143 anti-aircraft searchlights, transported from the air defenses of Moscow, positioned every 200 meters along the front. Female Red Army soldiers operated them. The plan was simple: blind the German defenders and illuminate the path to Berlin. The plan failed catastrophically. The bombardment had thrown so much dust, debris, and smoke into the air that the searchlight beams reflected back into the faces of the advancing Soviet troops. Instead of blinding the Germans, the lights turned Soviet soldiers into illuminated silhouettes, perfect targets against the artificial dawn. The defenders, emerging from deep bunkers and secondary positions, could see every Soviet movement across the floodplain. The machine guns opened fire. The German counter-barrage began. The intensity of defensive fire took the Soviet troops completely by surprise. Soviet infantry struggled forward across the flooded plain, sinking into mud and water. As the first tanks reached the heights, commanders realized Zhukov had underestimated something critical: the actual steepness of the terrain. Tanks couldn't climb directly. They had to search for detours running directly into prepared defensive positions. By 3:00 p.m., with the assault making virtually no progress, Zhukov panicked. He began shouting and swearing at his commanders. He threatened officers with demotion to penal battalions. Then he made a decision that would magnify the disaster. He ordered the tank armies forward, units that were supposed to exploit a breakthrough, not create one. The tanks had not been allotted space in the front line. There was no coordination. The result was chaos. A massive traffic jam developed beyond the Kustrin bridgehead. Infantry and armor became hopelessly intermingled. Friendly fire incidents multiplied. Soviet aircraft bombed their own units. At midnight, Zhukov phoned Stalin. He had not even reached the tops of the heights. Stalin seethed with anger. His response was calculated humiliation. He told Zhukov that Konev's first Ukrainian front, attacking to the south, was advancing according to plan. Then he delivered the blow. He was giving Konev permission to wheel his tank armies north, toward Berlin. The message was clear: fail again, and Konev takes the prize. Colonel General Vasily Kuznetsov, commanding the 3rd Shock Army, understood exactly what had gone wrong. As usual, we stuck to the book, and by now the Germans know our methods, he said. They pulled back their troops a good 8 kilometers. Our artillery hit everything but the enemy. April 17th dawned with clear skies. Soviet aircraft swept down on German trenches while the artillery resumed its punishment. The first Belarusian front slowly advanced, purchased in blood, meter by meter. General Vasily Chuikov's 8th Guards Army bore the brunt. Zhukov berated him for the slow advance. But Zhukov had underestimated the situation entirely. Evacuation of the wounded was shockingly slow. Units lost contact with their staffs. By nightfall, the German 2nd defensive line finally broke. But the cost was staggering. One Soviet infantry company was reduced from 104 men to just 20 exhausted survivors, an 80% casualty rate. 4 out of every 5 men killed or wounded. Meanwhile, to the south, Konev's forces were racing ahead against weaker opposition. His spearheads covered 37 miles in a single day. Stalin had turned his marshals against each other, and Zhukov was losing. On April 18th, elements of Zhukov's front finally broke through the last German defensive line. On April 19th, the German front ceased to exist. A gap 19 miles wide opened. Nearly 200,000 German soldiers would eventually be trapped in a pocket southwest of the Heights. The road to Berlin was open, but the butcher's bill had come due. At least 30,000 Soviet soldiers died at Seelow Heights. The Red Army lost over 700 armored fighting vehicles. German losses during the same period, approximately 12,000. The Soviets suffered nearly 3 times the casualties while attacking with nearly 10 times the men. The 143 searchlights that was supposed to ensure victory instead illuminated Soviet soldiers for German gunners. The massive artillery barrage fell on empty trenches. The tank armies thrown in early created traffic jams instead of breakthroughs. Colonel Hans Vollemann, a German artillery commander, had reported before the battle that soldiers from the 9th Parachute Division were running away like madmen, and that not even the threats of officers with drawn pistols could compel them to stand their ground. Yet these broken, terrified defenders held against nearly 1 million men for 3 days. Heinrici's tactical withdrawal before the bombardment, the decision to give up his first line rather than sacrifice men to defend it, proved the difference between the battle Zhukov expected and the slaughter that occurred. It was not superior German equipment or numbers. The defenders were fighting with depleted units, exhausted men, and limited ammunition. Many German positions were held by Volkssturm militia and Hitler Youth boys with minimal training. General Helmuth Weidling was disgusted when his order prohibiting underage soldiers from entering battle was ignored. Many of those boy soldiers perished fighting in a belt of forest near his headquarters. What made the difference was intelligence against brute force. Heinrici had correctly predicted the main Soviet thrust would come along the Reichsstrasse 1, the main east-west Autobahn through the Heights. He thinned out other sectors to reinforce exactly that area. He understood that prepared defenses and tactical competence could offset even the most massive numerical disadvantages. In the end, the breakthrough came not from Zhukov's frontal assault, but from Konev's success to the south. The first Ukrainian front's attack against weaker defenses was unhinging Heinrici's defense. The German 4th Panzer Army was being battered westward. Unless Heinrici's forces fell back, they faced complete envelopment. Heinrici managed what no one else could have under the circumstances. He delayed Zhukov by 3 days, embarrassing the best commander in the Soviet army. He turned what was supposed to be Zhukov's triumphant march to Berlin into a desperate race against Konev, a race Zhukov was losing. The memorial erected on the Seelow Heights after the war, designed by sculptor Lev Kerbel on Zhukov's own orders, contains the graves of just 198 Soviet soldiers. A bronze statue of a Red Army infantryman holding a submachine gun gazes at the graves beneath an inscription promising eternal glory to the heroes who fell fighting the fascist invaders. But 30,000 men died here. Where are the rest? Many remain in field graves scattered across the region around Seelow, unmarked, unvisited. Soviet military accounting was never precise about individual soldiers, and the speed of the advance after the breakthrough left little time for proper burial. A searchlight of the type used in the initial assault, the same type that backfired so catastrophically, stands in one corner of the cemetery. Whether this is irony or tribute is left for visitors to decide. 300 meters from the Reichstag, the armies of Zhukov and Konev encountered each other. Zhukov was livid. He came out of his vehicle and shouted at Konev's tank commander, "Why have you appeared here?" Stalin intervened, giving Zhukov the honor of taking the Reichstag itself. The red flag was raised over the building on May 2, 1945. The photograph became one of the most iconic images of the 20th century. Stalin got his symbolic victory. He got his photographs. He got to tell the world that the Soviet Union, not the Western Allies, had defeated Nazi Germany. But the price of that race was paid at places like Seelow Heights, not in military necessity, but in political theater. Not to defeat Germany. Germany was already defeated, but to ensure Soviet dominance in the peace that followed. Zhukov's memoirs would later claim the assault proceeded according to plan, that the artillery barrage caught the Germans in their trenches, that the searchlights worked as intended. The official Soviet history transformed 4 days of catastrophe into inevitable triumph. But the numbers don't lie, and the graves, the 108 marked and the thousands unmarked, remain. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more World War II historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.